A short presentation from the community overspray groups in regard to passive chemical pollution in New South Wales, titled Exposed, a Danger to All. In this short presentation, we'll be taking you through a number of facets of how this real world problem is actually manifesting out in rural areas. It is widespread, it is a danger to production of food and to people's health, and our group is dedicated to making sure that this is acknowledged and reported so that the necessary science can begin to address this problem. The issue is spread of agrochemicals far distant from where they are applied. The bottom left-hand photo shows fog of an early morning, and that's indicative of how chemicals can actually spread through the landscape. Once volatilized, they extend many, many kilometres past their application point, and so that puts everything at risk. There is no refuge from these effects. When travelling through the affected areas, how would one recognise what the damage actually looks like? Well, we're going to go through on this slide and the next few slides, indicative photos, widespread and then close up. You can see from these photos that the woody vegetation such as trees starts to die from the top. So this is showing a clear effect that the impact has not just been from a point source, not just from a nearby neighbour spraying, that this has come from a long distance away and perhaps multiple applications. When you look up close at leaves of various plants, you can start to see the similar symptoms occurring across many species, and so this indicates that it can't be disease or pest impact just giving the same symptoms over many different species, from vegetables to woody weeds to garden weeds. And the right hand bottom picture is nightshade. Top right hand is a liquid amber tree out of a garden in a town. The middle one is a lemon scented gum taken from a farm, and the left hand photo is showing a necrotic impact dot on a currajong tree. And this isn't just a problem of farms. These photos have been taken in Central West towns and showing various different garden plants. That's an agapanthus on the top left-hand side, and then down to some cucumber plants in the left bottom, a rose in the middle one, and strawberries far top right, and a yucca plant at the bottom right photo. Many different species showing very similar and repeatable effects. And a reasonable question might be put by many people, well, so what? The trees are showing that there's obviously something happening, and so how does that affect me? Well, the trees are just indicators. If it's falling on the trees, then it's fallen on the people, the food, the roofs, wherever rainwater is collected, and the whole ecosystem. And there's no way of mitigating or getting away from it if the indicators from the vegetation are that you are getting repeated exposures. It's very, very hard for the population to know, and the authorities are not informing people when they are actually being affected. To get your eye in even more when you're driving around and looking at vegetation, what should it actually look like? So here's just two different species that we've picked amongst the many, many species affected, and the left-hand two photos are of a healthy currajong tree versus a young unhealthy one in an affected area. The right-hand two photos are showing you what peppercorn trees look like. That's a healthy tree in an area that doesn't have agricultural chemicals, and then the bottom right-hand photo is showing out of a cotton area where they've repeated defoliations in the autumn regularly happen to the pepper trees, and they're an ideal indicator plant, even though they aren't a native. So the difficulties for people living in cotton growing areas is that the industry itself admits that the applications it puts on will travel in excess of 20 kilometres, and that all herbicides applied can cause drift damage. So that means that they are admitting that all of the chemicals being applied do go off where they are being applied. So given that the widespread damage and reports directly to Cotton Australia and throughout the regions that cotton has been growing, it's disappointing to say that even their own best practice spray application advice is not undertaken regularly. So the cotton industry has been trying to run a dual argument that it has been badly affected by sprays affecting its crops, but that its sprays have not affected other crops. Those with longer memories do remember the 1990s events with endosulfan and helix, where the cotton industry nearly brought the whole beef industry to a standstill due to contamination from cotton chemicals. So there is a track record and there is a continuing desire by the industry to deny that it's having the effects, even though the vegetation is clearly showing that that is the case. And the correlation is clear. In the autumn defoliation periods, there will be damage apparent widespread through the areas, and that correlates with the annual defoliation time of cotton. And so what has been the response from the various authorities that have overlapping responsibilities in regard to these issues? It has been not only neglect and refusal to inspect and assess the damage, but also deliberate attempts to suppress the knowledge and information to the public. This has extended from the Department of Agriculture to the Environmental Protection Authority of New South Wales, which there is evidence that both of those responsible authorities have not undertaken sufficient or adequate efforts to help the community, and most importantly, to advise the community when they're being exposed to these chemicals. Even though this problem is widespread and has been reported from widespread areas to the New South Wales EPA, we're just going to narrow down to one particular area of the Lower Macquarie area and single out what effects that the people there will be receiving in this area. So in this one small snapshot, not of the whole area, there are 92 separate cotton plantings from the previous year indicated on the map. When we place some circles on the map, which are 20-kilometre indicator circles, which is what the cotton industry itself says that the drift might go to at least, that you can see that if you're living in these areas, you're actually getting multiple directions of exposure. There are 92 fields, remember, and on this map all we've done is place 20 circles. So how cluttered would that map be with the 92 circles that we could draw on that, and then multiplied by the number of times cotton gets sprayed during the year. And at defoliation time now, cotton crops can be sprayed up to 3 or 4 times to achieve defoliation. So the number of exposures that anybody living in these areas can be an unknown number, and it's certainly unstudied, and the authorities are turning a blind eye to it to this point. And what impact does these exposures have potentially on the production of food? Once again, we're being very narrow here in examining one particular facet of it, and for livestock producers, they have to fill out a national vendor declaration, which is a food security document to say that the animals have not been exposed unduly to chemicals. The difficulty is, if the vegetation is indicating through landscapes that chemical exposure has occurred, then the producers are put in a very, very invidious situation of consigning animals to market. So this has implications for health, safety, and also industry. Our group has written hundreds of communications to the responsible authorities, politicians, and industry up to this point, to no great avail, unfortunately. The practices are still continuing, the exposures of our communities are continuing, and the extended results from that are that we are continuing to see a general ecocide through our landscapes as the very base vegetation of our natural support structures is taken away. So ever so slowly, death by many, many cuts of these exposures takes out plants and they cease to exist in the landscape. A whole total collapse of our vegetation and our natural landscape. We also get asked as a group and individually, well, what proof do you have? The one advantage that we have with this problem is that it is pretty hard to deny that the vegetation is being affected, even though blunt denial has been the tactic so far from industry and also from government departments. A refusal to accept that there is actual events in front of them has been a successful tactic to this point in time. And what reports have been done have been largely suppressed, and the information has not been brought out to the public. We'll continue to amass our own evidence, but also make strenuous efforts to ensure that what the government's authorities and the particular individual bureaucrats that are deliberately suppressing information to the public are exposed, and we can get this issue out and the problem solved. This quote from Joe Imig really encapsulates the whole issue. Passive chemical exposures are like passive smoking. They're very, very difficult to get away from, and if you are forced to be in a place where you cannot get away from those exposures, then you are negatively affected. And that is the base issue that we need to have addressed, is that any use of chemicals that goes and externalizes and negatively affects other people needs to stop. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. For the many of you that will be viewing this issue for the first time and then start recognising that the visible effects are clearly seen in your own rural areas, then first step is to actually call the EPA pollution line and report. Even though up to date we cannot find a single example where the EPA has done a proper and adequate assessment on vegetation notifications to it. This is a very unfortunate part of the situation, but unless you do report it and take those few steps that are listed there, then we have no hope at all, because the other agencies that have overlapping responsibilities here will always refer back to the EPA as being the lead agency. So please do report it in, but please do take plenty of notes and demand some customer service in regard to them coming and taking a fair dinkum look at things for the first time. And if you do live in cotton areas, continue to take photos and notes, because that will be for your own personal use and protection for future possible legal recourse as this set of issues continues. Thirdly, what we would like to ask you to do is, if you do have any contacts with the mainstream media, ask why they aren't covering these issues when many of these are quite apparent straight out their front door. So, if you continue to be interested, we would love to keep you appraised of what is happening in general. And our website is stoppoisonplains.com. There's a range of info there, and some funny stuff to lighten the way, as well as all the serious stuff and independent reports and evidence that this is actually happening. Thank you so much for your attention on this presentation, and we hope that we can progress and end passive chemical exposures for the health and well-being of everybody in the community.